I watched my grandmother's prized tomato plants collapse in a single weekend. She'd been tending them for months, and then suddenly the leaves turned yellow, the stems went mushy, and the whole thing just gave up. The soil smelled like a swamp. I was a kid then, and I remember her just calmly reaching for this plain brown bottle under the sink. She mixed a splash into her watering can and poured it around the base. 2 days later, the plants were standing back up. I never forgot that, not really, but for years I didn't understand what I'd seen. Now, after 15 years of my own gardening, and far too many expensive failures, I do. That brown bottle of hydrogen peroxide sitting forgotten in your medicine cabinet will fix more plant problems than a shelf full of overpriced sprays, and I want to show you exactly why. The reason you probably haven't heard about this is honestly kind of annoying. It works too well and costs too little for anyone to sell it to you. A big, shiny garden center can't put a patent on water and oxygen, which is what hydrogen peroxide becomes after it does its job. You can walk into any pharmacy right now, grab a 16-ounce bottle of the standard 3% solution for less than $1, and have enough to treat an entire indoor jungle for a season. The marketing industry would much rather you buy a $15 fungicide or a $20 root tonic, and so this information sits on the back shelf of history, passed around among the same old-timers who figured it out decades ago. I'm telling you, it's one of those quiet pieces of knowledge that nearly got lost because nobody stands to make a profit shouting it from the rooftops. I know exactly what you might be thinking right now. Probably just another miracle internet trick that doesn't actually work at all. I completely understand that skepticism. I thought the same thing, hand on heart, until I tried it on a fiddle leaf fig that was 2 days from the compost pile. But before I get to that, let's talk about what we're all up against. I don't need to tell you the frustration of watching a plant you love slowly die for no obvious reason. The leaves droop even though you watered 2 days ago. Tiny black specks buzz up from the soil when you touch the pot. Little white patches dust over the zucchini leaves in July, no matter how carefully you space them. You stand there with dirt under your fingernails, wondering if there's some secret you just weren't born knowing. Do you know that feeling? I know it all too well. Most of the usual advice leaves you worse off. Let's run through it. A quick word before I go on. What I show you here grows out of the old ways the people of my country kept, where nothing was ever wasted. My family gathered the heart of it into the Home Savings Almanac, 12 small books on the old ways of the home. The kitchen and the pantry, the garden, keeping the house clean and warm. The small repairs, and 400 simple ways to waste nothing and save $200 to $400 a month. You will find it linked in the description and the first pinned comment, or you can simply scan the QR code on your screen. If you want it, it is there. I will not mention it again. You could try the classic internet vinegar spray. It might burn off a few weeds and some surface fungus, but the pH shock to your soil is like pouring pickling brine on any healthy microbes you actually need. It's a temporary fix that creates a long-term recovery. Then there's neem oil, which can work, but it smells like a burning workshop. It clogs sprayer nozzles, and if you get the mix wrong in the midday sun, you'll fry the leaves you were trying to save. Of course, you could reach for the chemical fungicides from the big box store, but you're bringing something into your home or vegetable patch that you don't really want near your children or your salad. And boiling water on weeds, well, that's like performing surgery with a steamroller. It's effective only if you don't mind accidentally sterilizing a circle of earth the size of a dinner plate. None of this is what my grandmother used, and none of it solved my real problem, which was oxygen. More than anything, sick roots were suffocating. The old-timer who finally spelled it out for me was a former greenhouse manager named Mr. Sanchez. He saw me loading up on pricey soil drenches a few springs back and just shook his head. He pointed to a brown bottle on his potting bench and said 2 words. Extra oxygen. I stood there with my wallet half open, feeling a little foolish. He showed me a tray of leggy seedlings that had been staked up and sprouting strong dark leaves, and he said he'd been starting seeds with nothing but diluted peroxide for nearly 40 years. That was my moment. The one where you realize the answer has been sitting in the first aid aisle your entire life, and you never once connected it to the living world under your feet. So here's the reveal, plain and simple. It's not some exotic enzyme, it's not an essential oil blend, and it's certainly not a concentrated toxin. It's just household hydrogen peroxide, the stuff you already have. Chemically, it's H2O2. Water is H2O. The difference is that single extra oxygen atom. That atom is desperate to break free, and when it does, 2 things happen. The water stays behind as harmless moisture, and that free oxygen atom goes on a rampage against the kinds of pathogens that can only survive where there is no air. Fungus gnat larvae, root rot bacteria, powdery mildew spores on the leaf surface, they all require a low oxygen environment to thrive. Peroxide floods them with the one element they cannot handle, and it does so without leaving a single toxic trace. The fizz you see is the oxygen releasing, and that's the whole mechanism. It's elegantly simple. Let me give you the exact recipe for the 3 situations where this will save your garden. Write these down or take a screenshot because the measurements matter. For a general soil drench to aerate compacted soil and prevent root rot, you use 1 teaspoon of 3% hydrogen peroxide per 1 cup of room temperature water. Do not use cold water. It slows the reaction, and we want that oxygen kicking in immediately. For treating an active adult fungus gnat infestation in your houseplants, you bring the concentration up a notch. Mix 1 part of the 3% peroxide with 4 parts water. That's 1 cup of peroxide to 4 cups of water. Wait until the top inch of soil is dry, then water thoroughly until you see it run out the bottom of the pot. That fizz, that little sizzling noise you'll hear, is the larvae and eggs being oxidized on contact. Repeat once a week for 3 weeks, and you own the problem. For powdery mildew on leaves, whether it's on your cucumber vines or your phlox, you use 4 tablespoons of 3% peroxide per 4 cups of water in a spray bottle. Shake gently and mist the entire plant, paying special attention to the undersides of the leaves where spores first settle. Do this only in the early morning or late afternoon, never under direct noon sun. The water droplets can magnify light and burn, regardless of what's in them. A test spray on a single leaf 48 hours before full application is just good practice for any plant you haven't treated before, especially ones with delicate tissue like ferns or calatheas. Now here are the don'ts, because they are just as critical as the do's. Do not ever grab the high-strength peroxide from a beauty supply store or a hydroponics shop. Those can be 30% or more, and will chemically burn everything they touch if not diluted with extreme precision. Stay with the 3% brown bottle. Everything I'm telling you uses that standard solution. Do not mix a big batch and store it in a clear container. Light degrades peroxide rapidly, which is why it's always sold in opaque bottles. Mix only what you need for that day, or you'll just be pouring expensive water next week. And do not fall into the trap of thinking if a little is good, more is better. Dumping straight peroxide onto a struggling plant is a panic move that will oxidize the root hairs you're trying to help. Stick to these ratios, and you will see a turnaround. The science behind why this works is so intuitive once you have the mental picture. Think about what happens when you leave a plant in a pot with no drainage. The water fills the tiny air pockets in the soil, and after a few days, the roots have used up what little dissolved oxygen remains. The environment shifts from aerobic, meaning oxygen-rich, to anaerobic, meaning oxygen-poor. Most of the good soil biology either goes dormant or dies, and the pathogens that cause rot, they thrive precisely in that stagnant, airless soup. When you water in diluted peroxide, you are injecting dissolved oxygen directly into the root zone. The same thing happens when you spray it on a leaf coated in powdery mildew. The fungal threads, the mycelium, are made of cells that have no defense against a sudden burst of oxidative stress. Their cell walls rupture, and the visible fuzz dissolves back into air. It is, in the most literal sense, changing the chemical conditions so that what is killing your plant can no longer breathe. There is no resistance buildup, no systemic chemical you have to worry about later. Just H2O2 breaking down into H2O and O. My own first real test case was that fiddle leaf fig I mentioned. I rescued it from a chilly, overwatered corner of the house, where 2 other plants had already died. The leaves were brown at the edges, and the trunk felt soft where it entered the soil. Classic root rot. I unpotted it outside, trimmed every mushy root with clean scissors, and then I dunked the entire root ball into a solution of equal parts 3% peroxide and tapped water for about 30 seconds. The fizzing was dramatic, but not violent. I repotted into a clean container with fresh, dry potting mix, and I watered it in with the 1 teaspoon per cup maintenance dose. That was 18 months ago. Today, that same fig is taller than my kitchen table, with 14 new leaves this year alone. It cost me roughly 40 cents worth of peroxide. Once you see it work on one plant, you start seeing uses everywhere. For starting seeds, I now soak any seed with a hard coat, things like peas, okra, morning glories, in a solution of 1 ounce of 3% peroxide per 1 pint of water for 20 minutes before planting. It softens the seed coat and kills any surface pathogens that cause that heartbreaking damping off where a seedling sprouts and then just falls over dead. The germination rate is visibly faster. I started a flat of peppers side by side, 1/2 soaked, 1/2 not, and every single person who walked through my garden asked why the left side looked a week ahead. For cleaning tools, I used to waste time with bleach, which rusts metal and stinks of chlorine for hours. Now I just keep a spray bottle of straight 3% peroxide on the potting bench. 1 spritz on the shears, wipe dry, and I can prune from a diseased branch to a healthy one without spreading a thing. For the plastic pots I reuse every spring, a 20-minute soak in a 50-50 mix of peroxide, and water strips off the old salts and fungal residue. It's so simple. The thing that gets me every time I think about this is how close we came to forgetting it. Hydrogen peroxide was first isolated in the early 1800s, and by the mid-20th century, farmers used it to disinfect seed beds and treat livestock water. As synthetic fungicides entered the market, the old brown bottle got pushed aside for products with shelf talkers and money-back guarantees. But nature doesn't care about your marketing department. The chemistry has not changed. The extra oxygen still works just as well today as it did 100 years ago, and you don't need a license or a lecture to use it. You just need to remember that sometimes the most powerful fix is the simplest one, the one nobody is trying to upsell you. It makes you wonder what other quiet tools are hiding right under our sinks, doesn't it? If you decide to try even one of these applications this week, I want you to pay attention to the moment you see that fizz and think, well, that's just air. Exactly. That's the whole idea. And when your plants respond with crisp new growth, and the gnats are finally gone, a small part of you might get just a little bit angry about all the money you handed the marketing machine before you knew better. Hang on to that feeling. It makes us all smarter gardeners. If this video has saved you time, cash, or a favorite plant you thought was done for, hit that like button and subscribe to keep more of what you already have working for you. Share this with one person who still debates whether to toss a plant by the curb. The old-timers didn't have YouTube, but they had the brown bottle. Now you do too. Pass it on.